The set of 3 studies that I will present today get at what Jeff Pressing calls the issue of the meaningfulness of resolution. When conducting analyses at the millisecond level, how musically meaningful are these empirical observations, and are they even perceivable? We have a range of sophisticated music information retrieval tools at our disposal, so it's vital that we provide perceptual and musical context to these analyses. I will demonstrate an experimental and analytic design that can easily be replicated in other contexts to provide this much needed context to microtiming analyses. And I will present a set of findings about the ability of normal listeners to discriminate between different drumming timing profiles. Briefly, the motivation behind this project was a lack of specifically musical just noticeable difference research, which makes me uncomfortable with some of the music analytic claims I was making based on microtiming analyses. There is a substantial existing literature on just noticeable differences, the amount something must be changed in order for differences to be noticeable to a perceiver. And these give a wide range of results for how fine-grained listeners' perceptual acuity is. These studies find variously that listeners have a temporal resolution of just over 1 millisecond, up to 10 milliseconds, and even down to 10 microseconds. The majority of these studies look at the J&D between a sound event and an expectation, for example, detecting whether a sequence of clicks is perfectly isochronous, or whether one of the events occurs slightly earlier or later, though other methodologies include detecting whether 2 sounds are perfectly synchronized, judging the temporal order of 2 simple notes, and detecting small gaps in a continuous sound. From surveying these J&D studies, it's evident that temporal resolution of oral perception is highly context and task dependent. As such, if we are to talk meaningfully about complex phenomena like feel or groove, and their relation to microtemporal musical events, we cannot rely on J&D research that uses pure tones, wood blocks, white noise clicks, etc. Instead, we need music-specific and perhaps even genre or instrument-specific J&D research. The present study focuses on the complex multi-instrument texture of drum kit performances to provide drum-specific measures of what is perceivable by American listeners. The methodology presented here may easily be replicated with other musical instruments to establish microtemporal perceptual baselines for other contexts. So first, I created a drum machine in Python that generates 8-bar performances with specific timing profiles by sampling from normal distributions with predefined qualities. Here, performances are at 80 BPM and 110 BPM. Hi-hats were metronomic throughout, but the snare and bass drum parts took on pushed or laid-back profiles, that is, having a tendency to occur before or after the metronomic hi-hats, and they were either tight, which is low variance, or loose, higher variance. The amount of offset, that's the mean location, and the spread, the standard deviation, were of comparable size to the findings of some drum corporal analyses that I've done. And just to show you what these distributions look like, this is obviously highly exaggerated. So in my study, for each of the 3, I recruited 36 participants on MTUG, and I got consent, gathered basic demographic information, and asked them to self-report their hearing ability. The core of this study makes use of an ABX paradigm, in which participants listen to 3 drum performances in each trial, 2 reference stimuli, A and B, followed by an unknown third stimulus, X, that shares the properties of either A or B. Participants then make a choice as to whether X sounds more like A or B. This is what participants saw. And here's a quick demo to give you a sense of what participants heard. So which of these 3, which of the first 2, who does drummer 3 sound most like? 1, 2, 3. Here's the answer. So to analyze this, I want to highlight one methodological piece that is important to this study. I use signal detection theory to evaluate each participant's sensitivity separately from their bias. This more detailed approach does not simply consider binary correct, incorrect, but instead probes deeper, separating out bottom-up sensitivity and top-down bias. I also used some mixed effects models to get inside the specific timing profile contrasts and understand where variance in participant performance may come from. Experiment 1 presented participants with all possible contrast pairs across 24 trials at 2 tempi. Of the 719 individual trials that are included in the analysis, I just screened 5 participants out for hearing and 25 trials that took too long. Participants got 532 matches correct, which is 74%, and that is statistically different from chance. If we analyze all the data using signal detection theory, participant performance is also significantly better than chance. The confidence interval does not overlap with 0. Looking more precisely at the data, it's possible to evaluate the performance of each individual participant. This plot shows each participant's D prime value, indicated by the point on the top, as well as the 95% confidence interval around that point. Of the 29 responses with analyzable data, all but 1 participant have D prime values whose 95% confidence intervals do not overlap with a score of 0, which would indicate that there are no perceptual differences in the time profile. As such, it's possible to say that for the vast majority of participants, 24 out of 29, they are able to distinguish between drum performances that have different timing profiles. This gives us some confidence in microtiming analyses of drum performances, as listeners do appear to be sensitive to subtle differences in timing of the magnitude found in real performances. Experiment 2 finessed this to home in on pushed versus laidback. That is, the variance of the distributions is held constant, but the center is moved before or after the metronomic hi-hat. Everything else is the same as the last one. In this study, 773 trials were included and 437 were correctly matched, which is significant. And D prime values were also showed that participants were better than chance performance. There's a large amount of missing information in this one, which I can again clarify. But for the 16 participants that can be evaluated using signal detection, just 9 have confidence intervals that do not overlap with 0. Meaning that only these 9 may confidently be said to successfully discern between pushed and laid-back performances. There's also no difference between stimuli at 80 and 110 BPM. Time is tight today, but the main piece of insight that the mixed effects model provides is that 93% of the variance in successful matches is attributed to the individual participants' performances and the effect of the different tempi within that. Very quickly, just the headline findings of experiment 3. Here I honed in on tight and loose, that is performance with low or high variance in microtiming. Lots of gaps in the statistical output, but here 18 participants only 18 could be evaluated using signal detection theory, and 12 have confidence intervals that do not overlap with 0, meaning only 12 can be said to successfully discern. The mixed effects model here is very interesting. It finds that performance is worse for tight profiles than loose profiles, and that 96% of variance lies within individual participants. So overall, this study has been a useful first step towards demonstrating that listeners are able to perceive some types of subtle nuances and differences between drummers' time profiles, which provides firm foundations upon which musical analyses may stand. In both the omnibus comparison of all performance profile types and the controlled comparisons of push versus laid back, success rates and individual participant scores were significantly above chance performance for a majority of the participants who participated in the studies. However, things are not crystal clear, as in the case of tight versus loose profiles. It is not clear beyond reasonable doubt that participants are able to consistently tell the difference between a tight and a loose profile. I would argue that this does not prohibit analyses of music that considers the tightness or looseness of a performer, but experiment 3's findings do show that many listeners may not be sensitive, or their sensitivity may vary widely to these extremely subtle differences. Finally, for all 3 experiments, there was no connection between participant success, the discrimination task, and their musical training, listening habits, genres, or performance experience. We may interpret this as giving confidence to the idea that listeners, no matter their background, experience, or training, are able to hear subtle differences in performances, with the caveat that tight versus loose is far more challenging. So overall, recognizing different time fields is possible, and it is not an elite or a specialized skill. Thank you.